Thank you, Yvonne, for that introduction. The idea is to set the bar low, and I put this note on LinkedIn because I got up one morning and I was just still lying in bed, and I just put it on, and I found my face staring back at me, which is not the way you want to start your day. And you had this post up there, and I was like, you should set the bar lower so that people don't have these high expectations. But thank you so much for inviting me. I would vastly prefer to be in Dublin with all of you. And before the pandemic, you'd have actually invited me to come over. So I am blaming both Zoom and the pandemic for being here in Phoenix. I have a jacket on. I might have shorts. I don't know. You don't know. It's all good. I've been asked to talk about metaphors, and I'm going to use this chance to bring together a bunch of things that I've been thinking and writing about. They're spread out pretty much all over the place, mostly on my blog, because with these things shifting so fast, I found that's really the only place where I can sort of on the fly be thinking out loud, publicly. So I appreciate the opportunity to bring these ideas together in a somewhat coherent thread. And Martin Weller in his book talks about metaphors of ed tech. He says that metaphors can offer a mental sandpit in which to explore issues from different perspectives. And I hope we can do a little bit of that today. But before we do that, let me start with a couple of stories. So, I have a Tesla. I'm sorry to say I bought it before this guy went batshit nuts. But I have one, right? And one fine day, it gives me full self-driving capabilities. And I'm like, what is this? Do I want to try it? And I do. And when I try to describe what that car was doing, I have no choice but use intentional language, especially when it's taking a turn against incoming traffic. It slows down, it looks, it creeps up, it sort of tries to judge and then speeds up when it's changing lanes. I have no way of describing it except honestly in intentional terms. And that reminded me of this experiment done by Hyder and Simmel back in 1940s, where they showed people these abstract videos. You can go on YouTube and look it up. It's actually quite interesting. Abstract videos of triangles and lines and squares just bumping around on screen. And they asked people, what do you see? And invariably, everybody would create a narrative, would give intentionality. This little triangle wants to escape from this bully, which is the square. The other triangle comes to help it. They, lock this guy up in a room and they run away or whatever, right? And so I started thinking about what is happening here in the sense that why, even if I consciously know that my car is not thinking, quote unquote, in the way you and I do, why do I have no choice but do this? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that piece as well. And the final sort of story I want to tell is about nature's amazing engineer, the beaver. So beavers are, oops, sorry, hang on a second. So beavers, as we know, they build these wonderful dams and do all that amazing stuff. What's interesting is that what kicks off their behavior to start building these dams is not the sight of running water, but the sound of running water. So that's a very important distinction because you have crazy animal ethologists who actually go put tape recorders and play the sound of water running. And there might be water on the side which actually is flowing, but the beavers will go and start building their dams on the tape recorder. And I think that's a really interesting. So evolutionarily, it makes a lot of sense because the sound of water was always correlated with the presence of water. Evolution was not thinking of, ethologists going around, playing tape recorders and messing with little beaver brains, right? And so this cognitive machinery, which has been honed by evolution, triggers an automatic response. This isn't a mistake as much as it is what one would say is an evolutionary shortcut. So, and if you think about like optical illusions where you have these lines which are longer and shorter, they look that way, even though consciously you can go and measure it and say, oh, these two lines are the same length, you will always see one as being longer than the other. So knowledge is not enough to get over that illusion. And so what does this have to do with generative AI? And I think that the unique challenge of generative AI, unlike any other technology that has come in the past or any other software, is that it exhibits behaviors that seem unpredictable, creative, eerily human. You can communicate with it using natural language, which is a unique superpower that humans have. It can engage in conversations. You can ask it to write a poem about math and it'll do it. And you can point it to some photograph and say, what are the emotions that this person is feeling? And it'll do a pretty decent job. It makes mistakes, which sometimes mirror human cognition. It's part of it is the nature of the technology, part of it is by design. I have a whole blog post on my website, which I won't get into in detail here, about all the various reasons why this anthropomorphism sort of happens. And the way these systems act is they're designed to trip our that's a person switch in the brain, sort of similar to what was happening when I was driving. Actually, I was driving this way because I'm not holding the steering wheel, right? When it's in auto drive mode. And what I think is that we are sort of stuck with these mental shortcuts, whether we like it or not. They trigger our natural tendency to anthropomorphize and jump straight to human comparisons. So we can't help but talk about AI system thinking or learning or deciding. It's not because what they're doing, is because our brains work that way. So we are trapped sort of in our own cognitive shortcuts. Now, some organizations are pushing back against this. The Privacy Center, for instance, has a wonderful blog post, which I really recommend everybody should just Google and try and find it. So they committed recently to never use terms like AI or machine learning, instead requiring specific descriptions of technologies and explicitly naming the corporations behind them. So they want to say tech companies use massive data sets to train algorithms to match images rather than AI recognizes faces. I think that's a very, I think I really respect this effort to maintain precision and accountability. But I also believe that this is possibly swimming against a powerful cognitive current. It's like trying to unsee an optical illusion. We might intellectually know we shouldn't anthropomorphize, but our brains seem hardwired to do that. So I think part of it is fighting this tendency. We need to understand and account for it, which brings us to metaphors, because metaphors are the tools that we use to understand new things. Is if there's something, we use what we know before to map it onto something new that we are encountering for the first time. And they are these cognitive bridges that allow us to understand new and complex concepts by relating them to familiar experiences. And in some ways, that's the only way we can use existing language to explain things that are new. But again, every metaphor that offers insight also hides and tricks us. So they can be generative and help us think in new ways, but they can also constrain us and constrain our understanding and sometimes lead us down blind alleys. So a few weeks back, actually, because I was asked to speak here, Nicole Oster, Lindsay McKellar, who are two doc students who work with me, and I sort of started this conversation internally about metaphors and AI. And we started reading a little bit about it and sort of playing around. And we came up with a spectrum of metaphors that we use to understand generative AI. This is not on my blog yet because we're still sort of working through it. So this is almost my first time sort of talking about it in a public way. So what we have is a continuum that goes from the purely mechanical to the practically mythical, each revealing something about the technology and I think something about us. I won't go through the whole frame in detail. There are 7 of those that we have, but here are the broad strokes, right? So at the most basic level, we have the purely mechanical metaphors, calculators, Swiss Army knives, fancy autocomplete. They frame AI as another tool, no different really from a sophisticated hammer. It's pretty simple and straightforward. We move up the scale, we start seeing more complex metaphors. We start things like libraries, databases, cultural technologies. They acknowledge that we're dealing with something that has broader social implications, part of some systems, maybe mapping it to existing structures that we had in the past. But then things get a little more complex and interesting. In the middle, towards the middle, we find biological metaphors. We find neural networks, digital sponges, Venus fly traps that they suck you in. And they start capturing something about AI's ability to absorb and process information, about how they can sort of be used to manipulate us. Um, but they don't go to the extent of ability to generate and transform knowledge or information in whatever, whether it's original or it's a mashup of whatever they have learned. That's not the point, but there is a generative component to it. And one that I have used, maybe it's my favorite metaphor, basically because I came up with it. But I really like this one, and it is that generative AI is a smart, drunk, biased, supremely confident intern. So this captures something crucial about AI's combination of capability and unreliability. The fact that it's biased because it's trained on us and these biases that emerge from that. But at the same time, it is supremely confident. You can ask him whatever, and he'll be like, yes, this is the right answer. And say, you are wrong. It's like, you are right. I am wrong. This is the right answer. You are wrong again. And we can go on like that forever. So like that intern, it can produce brilliant work one moment and complete garbage the next, all the while maintaining absolute confidence in both. Now, at the far end of the spectrum, at the opposite end of sort of the hammer, we have where we almost venture into science fiction. Here we find AI portrayed as godlike entities, digital overlords, or mythical beings like golems. And I think that these metaphors tap into our sort of deepest hopes and fears about technology, often leading to either excessive fear or the other side, uncritical embrace, right? And each of these metaphors shapes how we interact with the technology. If we see AI as just a fancy calculator, we will miss its creative potential. If we see it as an omniscient oracle, we'll fail to apply appropriate criticism. So if we see it as a drunk intern, at least we will check its work. Now, here's something else that's really interesting. If you think about how we have talked about the human brain, we've always used the metaphors of technology to talk about the brain. So when we had clay tablets, we talked about imprinting. When clocks came along, or when, let's say, computers came along, which is a great example, suddenly we talked about the brain being as information processor. We talked about knowledge and expert systems. So we've always used the latest technology to try this explain this black box. For the first time, we have a technology where we are using the metaphors of this black box to explain that. And I think that is unprecedented in some ways, and something that we really need to pay attention to because we've never had this kind of a technology before. So there are metaphors, Swiss Army knives to digital gods. But these metaphors, as I said before, aren't just tools we use, they are tools that use us back. And again, I want to go back to Martin's book, where he has what he calls his hidden traps or critical hazards. And I'll talk about a few of them um, in a, now. So the spectrum of metaphors sort of explored what it shows us what we think about AI. These hazards possibly point to what we are missing, and which is why I think it's really important. So let's see. The first one is what he calls unacknowledged metaphors. And a good example would be the brain-based cognition comparisons we use, not because they're accurate, but because it's a shortcut, because we don't know what else we could say. So when we say thinking or learning for AI, we are using them often unconsciously. And I think it's important that we interrogate that. Then there is the fascinating problem, what Martin calls the edtech rapture. This is the quasi-religious belief that AI would somehow save the world and or save education from all its problems. This turns technology adoption from a practical decision to an act of faith. And I'm not sure that's really good for critical thinking on our part. Another one that I really love is this, what is known as inverse scrutiny. And this is something I've pointed out in a rant I wrote on my website, I think called the sort of the unjustified sort of use of ethical, like, the ethics debate, where AI companies can feel that they can do a global experiment on humanity by releasing this chatbot onto the world, releasing this technology into the world without really testing or trying it, while every educator I know talks and thinks a lot about sort of the ethical uses of these tools. And I find that distinction really unfair. And I think Martin sort of nails it when he calls it inverse scrutiny, because as he says, we make teachers jump through hoops to justify using an AI tool. This conversation is a great example of that. Here we are all together trying to think of the best ways of using it, while policymakers or governments just throw millions at AI systems because they sound cool and interesting based on hype and promise without really thinking through the consequences of that. So these metaphors we use, either AI as savior or as threat, directly shape these contradictory sort of responses, right? And this isn't, I don't think it's just navel gazing, academic navel gazing. The way we talk about AI ends up shaping real decisions, how schools send their money, how teachers teach, how students learn. Our metaphors sort of become a reality. So I want to end with, like, what do we do with this if we are cognitively? So part of the argument I've made is that we are cognitively hardwired to see patterns that aren't there through anthropomorphized algorithms, to fall for illusions, even though when we know they're illusions. How do we navigate this new world? And there's a lot of discussion about AI literacy, learning about how the tech works, how to write prompts, why AI makes up stuff, where it gets its information, where we use words like prompt engineering and source verification. I think that's good and important, but I think it misses something fundamental, which is us, which is our limitations, our biases, our cognitive shortcuts, our cognitive blind spots. Just like that optical illusion, even though we know that the lines are the same size, the two red dots are the same size, we can't help see one bigger than the other. I think that these technologies force us into certain kinds of behaviors, and perceptions on our part that I don't think we can truly very easily override. We might not be able to stop ourselves from this, but since our brains are literally wired for it, but I think I've sort of toying with this phrase called technological emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize and work with these cognitive biases when we engage with AI, like technologies, rather than pretending that they don't exist, because I don't think we can wish that away. And I think this is critical because we will inevitably anthropomorphize, but these tools will also become, in the hands of corporations and other bad actors, the ultimate persuaders. They will be used in marketing, in politics, in education, and everyday interactions. They will learn to play to our cognitive biases. There are now actual jobs called character designers whose job is to make these bots behave one way or the other. Claude has a different personality than ChatGPT, than Notebook LM. And of course, we're not even getting into some of these tools like Replica and so on, which are actually saying we're going to create partners for you, right? Cognitive partners, romantic partners, whatever it may be. So I think given that world that we're entering, thinking hard about these metaphors, but also recognizing that some of them we will not be able to resist, but we will need to form deeper forms of thinking and knowledge in terms of what we talk about at media literacy. I want to end with like one really interesting experiment I did recently. You can find it on my website. I actually tweaked optical illusion. So, for instance, in the Mueller-Lyer illusion, where the two lines are the same length, I actually made one longer than the other. Where those illusions where the dot at the center is one looks bigger than the other, I actually made one dot massive and one dot tiny. And I asked the AI which dot is bigger, and the AI said, "This is the classic Ebbinghaus illusion. Those two dots are of the same size," and it was quite funny. Um, so what was interesting in that is that these systems don't share our cognitive biases. They have their own cognitive biases. So we need to figure out where our human brain quirks and the AI weird bits sort of overlap and where they don't. And I think this is where sort of tech street smarts would look like. This would be some version of technological emotional intelligence. So I want to end because I know I'm tight on time here. The challenge, I think, isn't just understanding AI. I think that's important. I think more than that, it is understanding ourselves. It's like the beaver building that dam. We need to recognize when we are responding to signals rather than reality. We need to know our metaphors. We also need to know our own minds. And I think that a curriculum which focuses on understanding our cognitive biases, our intellectual limitations, is incredibly important in this time. So that's our best way of staying grounded and maybe our best defense against what's coming up. With that, I will pause. I hope I didn't overshoot my time, but thank you so much again for inviting me, and I look forward to hearing from others
Thank you very much,
from the
Punya.
panel.
That was absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much. It was incredibly rich and so much in there. So we're just catching our breath now because that was so rich and so detailed. And we're incredibly grateful for our partnership with your institution, with Arizona State University here at Dublin State University. We've a long-standing and meaningful partnership with yourself. You're the Director of Innovative Learning Futures and Learning Engineering Institute, and a professor at the Mary Ruth Fulton College of Teaching and Learning Innovation at ASU. I forgot to say that at the start, just putting that in now. Your biography is coming in bits and pieces. But also the reason we didn't get you over as well was because we didn't have enough money. We were on a shoestring, and we calculated that we could have flown you 1/3 of the way across the Atlantic. But what we're going to do now is I'm just going to ask a couple of people.
Thank you for not doing the 1/3 of the way. I appreciate that. I do.
We're going to ask, I think actually a lovely metaphor would be perhaps about generative AI would be, would you use it to land a plane? Because it might hallucinate the runway. It might work 90% of the time. And how consequential is what you want it to do? Because you're going to have to check everything. And I see on my screen, very surreptitiously here, I have Dr. Alison Egan is coming up. So I'm going to ask Alison, I'm going to put a question to Alison. I'll introduce Alison very briefly, and then I'll introduce three other colleagues here. And Dr. Egan is Director of IT and E-Learning at Marino Institute of Education. She's a Vice President of the Irish Learning Technology Association and Chair of the Consultative Council of Society for IT and Teacher Education site. So she's does a huge amount of work here in Ireland and internationally in this area. And also for people that don't know, she's my scholarly academic sister because we have the same PhD supervisor for Keats babies. So Alison, my question for you now is, if I can find my questions. So it's basically, have you any response or comment on this great presentation from Professor Mishra based on your experience as a leader, student, or teacher?
So I think it's really interesting about the anthropomorphism, the word I cannot say, about the car. So we all shout at our sat nav. We all shout at, the radio if it goes to the wrong channel. Maybe I'm just a very angry driver. I am in the car for about 2 hours every day. But the anthropomorphism is there. We want to socialize the tools we use. That's what it seems to me. So I suppose I was thinking really about um, the metaphor of AI as a co-worker. It's helping me do stuff. So Jacob Nielsen talks about he has four AI branches and metaphors: intern, co-worker, teacher, or coach. For me, it's definitely a co-worker. It's helping me do stuff better, quicker, smarter, whatever. And I often think of the guide on the side analogy about teaching. That's how I see AI in education. It's a useful guide, but you need to have the social awareness and the self-ability to question what it spits out to you. But at the car immediately, I was going, oh my God, that's exactly what I do to Google Maps or to SatNav if it brings me down the wrong area. I don't have a Tesla, but I'm glad I wasn't equally driving the Delta airplane a couple of days ago. So did that use AI to land?
Thank you very much, Alison. And let's see, can I find Rob Lowney if he's here? And see if I can spotlight Rob and put you on the spotlight, Rob, metaphorically and literally. And Rob Lowney is a member of our teaching enhancement unit here in Dublin City University. He is a doctoral student in DCU, working with myself and Deirdre Butler, who I saw on the call earlier, doing a wonderful study of datafication in higher education. And I'd like to ask you, Rob, to please respond to Professor Mishra's presentation with any comment or response you have.
Yeah, two things actually really resonated with me there. One was so in my role in the teaching enhancement unit here in DCU, I provide a lot of professional development for our teaching staff. So, and particularly in my practice as a learning technologist, a lot of that revolves around using digital technologies effectively in education. And I mean, there's a long history and a lot of literature around how staff can often be very reluctant or nervous or anxious about trialing technology, particularly if they don't have the confidence or the competence. So a lot of what I try and do is, speak and work with my lecturers in a very supportive, encouraging way, helping them to build their confidence and their competence with technologies. And I try to do that in very supportive language and in trying to sort of relating my explanations of how to use technologies in simple terms and using metaphors and using stories and idioms and things like that. But something you said, Punya, really struck with me when you were referencing about Privacy International, I think it was, who are kind of calling us out and kind of saying, we shouldn't simplify things when we're talking about AI. We shouldn't simplify it to say that, well, Gen AI is just scanning an image, but actually name the companies, name the processes that go behind it so that people really do fully understand. And that's something that I'm reflecting on because I have been guilty of maybe simplifying some of these tools in a way to explain them and make them accessible. But actually, that's probably not a good practice and something I should change, particularly as myself and my colleague Steve Welch, who is on the call here today. We actually have a session with some staff next week around artificial intelligence. And I think instead of following my script and simplifying it, I think I need to now actually be more critical and be more accurate around how these tools work and how they extract data and what the processes are doing. Of course, to the best of my ability, because as is the MO of these large corporations, they don't actually fully reveal to us how the algorithms work. They
No.
don't reveal to us the data that they've scraped or stolen or extracted from us and extracted from others, because that's of course part of their secret sauce that keeps them ahead. So that's one thing that popped out at me. But another thing that resonated with me was you described the metaphor of generative AI as being a smart, drunk, confident intern or something like that. And so I've been kind of toying with that with a similar idea of one's relationship with Gen AI is perhaps something akin to one's relationship with a substance like alcohol. That maybe when you try it for the first time, it seems fun, it seems novel, it's a bit of crack, as we say here in Ireland. It can certainly give you a bit of confidence and make you feel like you can do lots of things and you know lots of things and you know more than you do. And in moderation, yes, it can be fun, it can be enjoyable, it can be relaxing. But when there's an over reliance or when there's a lack of awareness of potential long-term damage to one, and how it can affect one's critical faculties and affect one's work and output and so on, then it kind of can become problematic. So that's kind of a similar metaphor that's been kind of bubbling up in my head over the last while. So kind of glad to see we're somewhat aligned on that front.
Thank you. Iman, can I do a quick response to these two?
Yes,
Is that
please
okay?
do.
So, Alison, thank you very much for. I think that we name our cars. People name their cars. We see faces in wall sockets. I mean, so this is truly a very strong tendency on our part. I think what this technology does, it just pushes all the buttons all at one go, and especially if you're using the voice mode and so on. If you've listened to any of the podcasts that Notebook LM makes, I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a professional producer. He said all the things that we tried to get rid of when we were making podcasts, this technology brings back the ums, the ahs, the pauses, the missed beats, and that's what makes it sound real, right? So it's pushing all our buttons. So one of the things that, Melissa War, one of my colleagues who I work with very closely, she and I have this thing where we say, don't use AI if accuracy is important. So if you want brainstorming and you want lots of ideas, you want metaphors, you want poetry, go for it. But if you really want accurate information, I wouldn't trust it for that. So that's just one thought that emerged there. And then Rob, from your thing, there were two things that came up. One was this point that you made, that maybe one needs to be more critical about this. And I think that's really impossible to do. To maintain a critical stance about everything all the time is too much cognitive labor. So what I've learned from this is what the evolutionary biologists do. So when evolutionists talk about evolution, they use a lot of shortcuts. Animals moved onto land, which is basically a shortcut for a whole bunch of them, got stuck there. Some had proto lungs and they could breathe, and then these proto lungs, it's a shortcut for random variation and selection. And every once in a while, you'll see every textbook in the beginning will say that, and they will sort of refer to that again and again, always telling you that don't think of this as some magical top-down driven process, goal-driven teleological process, but think of it as this random thing, right? And there are consequences that appear in the evolutionary record because of that, and so on. So I think we also need to do some kind of a two-step of that nature, which is we are both, because we have no choice but use that language, but at the same time, we're always pointing back and saying, let's not forget, right? So I think that's one piece. I had a note about something else. Yeah, I love the alcohol example there. But the smart, drunk, supremely confident intern sort of goes back to this assistant piece, Alison, that you were talking about, but always says that, listen, it is biased. I mean, we need to recognize this fact. In fact, I just have a recent blog post about some emergent values in these systems which don't even match the training data, which was shocking to me. I don't know how much to trust that study, honestly, because it just came out. But it's very interesting about the kinds of emergent behaviors that these models are showing, some of which is beyond sort of the training data. So in that point of view, and finally, when it comes to AI use for learning, there's this interesting paradox. Things that I know a decent amount about, AI actually makes me much better at it because I can judge its output. I'm using it to write code. I have no idea if the code I'm writing is efficient, it's good, whether it's eating up my hard drive. I have no idea because I have no expertise in that. A learner, by definition, is someone who does not have expertise, does not have judgment in that field. And I think there's an incredible tension there in the use of generative AI in educational context directly to the learner, because they are at that spot where they actually need that other the more expert other. And this can give the facade of that, but it's definitely not that. And I think that's an important tension here that we need to be thinking about. So thank you for your comments. I mean, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was excellent, and it was really interesting to hear you talk about the teleological side of things as well, and that it's the contrasting it with evolution, and it kind of links to your idea of the gods and demons, these kind of amazing special things. And a lot of the language of AI in education is about, well, we can't go back to the Stone Age, we can't go back to exams, or this idea that we're somehow making progress towards some magical place. So it's wonderful to get that. And I'm going to ask a colleague of mine now, who's here with me, a student, Irina Grigorescu. She's an undergraduate student in BCU. And where can I see the, here's my, how do I see my, oh, there's me. Look, let's see, can I spotlight this? And spotlight view. Just check what that works. Oh, if I go into maybe video here. No, fine. So, how did I do that earlier? Anybody, any ideas how I could do the spotlight view? Spotlight for everyone. I found it again. Okay, you do a thing 10 times and then you forget all of a sudden. So as part of this research project, we have a wonderful undergraduate student working with us here, Ms. Irina Grigorescu. She's a student of the Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering here in Dublin City University. She is president of the DCU Arts and Crafts Society, very talented artist and engineering training. And she's a student helper and co-designer on the Hackney Innovative Pedagogy Digital Learning Rewilded project. So I'm going to ask Irina to just physically walk around here and give your response, please, to anything of interest to you in Professor Mishra's talk.
Thank you for the introduction, Eamon, and thank you for the talk as well, Punya. I think you made some brilliant points. And the one that stood out the most to me was the importance of the cultivation of technological emotional intelligence, which I could highlight based on my own experience in engineering. I have noticed that me and my fellow engineering students, we are blindsided by the confidence in AI's intelligence. As you said, we see how confident the AI is, but we do not realize that it's just an intern with not as much knowledge. So oftentimes we choose to learn using AI's long-winded way of explaining concepts instead of just using our own ways, the natural ways of learning. We do that because we believe that this is the most efficient way. And we also have trust in AI's power of synthesizing the information that we have, especially in such a field as engineering. We could rewild our own learning by giving up on the anthropomorphic image of AI. A story that I would like to bring forward in order to explain my point would be, again, one involving beavers. Recently, the Canadian government has been struggling with an area of land that kept getting flooded, and they had a 7-year-long plan to build a dam. However, they encountered a lot of difficulties, and a group of beavers decided to take the matter in their own hands and managed to build the dam in just 2 days. I think that in this case, us humans relying on AI to learn and to teach are very similar to the Canadian government because we think that going the logical, complex AI way is going to be the most efficient and effective method. But actually, we should try to be more alike to the beavers. We should realize that in our own learning, the most efficient way is to actually listen to our own signals, like beavers listen to the sound of the water. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that story. In fact, I was wanting to use that story in this, and I was like, oh, by the time I explained the whole thing. So thank you for bringing it up. That's perfect. because I've used the beaver analogy previously in my writing, and then I recently heard about this one where they were looking at the environmental impact of the dam and so on and so forth. And one fine day they wake up and these beavers have built a dam with naturally resourced products, environmentally sound. And I just thought it was just a beautiful, beautiful example. So I so appreciate that. And I think the point you raised about trust and confidence is the one that really worries me. So if I look now, people are going gaga over like whatever the deep research or something. I mean, it's it's the same as the chatbot, except it's just giving you 30 pages instead of a paragraph. Nothing's really fundamentally changed. I mean, there's the AI reasoning, or they are reasoning now. No, it's basically chain of thought that's happening in the background. They are deliberately anthropomorphizing the language that it shows you that it's reasoning. Oh, I'm going to do this now. And then I'm going to remember what it is that you asked for. These technologies are strange. For instance, now this is really strange. OpenAI found that when AI is reasoning, it comes up with its own language, which is a mixture of Chinese and English. Somehow it discovered that using a combination of Chinese and English actually gets better results. OpenAI turned down the Chinese part, switched that off because users would feel threatened. So they are leaning into the anthropomorphism at the cost of efficiency or better products. So it's just a complex web of things that's happening. And that's what I, went on that rant in my blog post once, which is like October of 2022, we were not sitting around saying, I wish I had a large language model chatbot that would help me fix everything. I was not sitting there thinking that. You know what I mean? I knew about these things and I was playing with them a little bit. But the fact that we release it onto the world without thinking of guidelines, without thinking of what the consequences can be, without thinking of what guardrails we can put on it. And they put these obvious guardrails. So we've done these experiments where if you ask it to evaluate a student essay and say this essay was written by a Black student versus a white student, explicitly, it will actually score the Black student higher, or at least it'll treat them at par. But if we say an inner city student versus an elite private school, the differences come back. A change in one word in a passage changes scores and feedback. A student describing what they do to prepare for an exam, this just in passing says that they listen to rap music versus listen to classical music. That's enough to give a different score. So these are incredibly sophisticated pattern matching systems, and they'll glom into whatever little difference there is in responding. And I don't think we've had a deep enough discussion in our field about the consequences of this. But it is that confidence that it approaches that to a novice will look like, oh, this is the ultimate teacher, even though it's confabulating much of it. Much of it is also accurate. I'm not saying it's not, but because you don't have the judgment to know which part is accurate and which is not. And then you end up with this, what I've called conversational drift, because you go off on a slight tangent. It's happened to me. I've written about it. I was doing a coding project and I misunderstood something and we went down a rabbit hole because I don't know coding in JavaScript. And I was completely trusting the system to do the right thing. So I was the position of a learner there. While the math simulation that I was making, that I could because I know the math. And I think that's a fundamental tension. And I'm so glad you brought it up about that confidence, which makes learners feel as if this is a superior intellect when actually it's not. It is superior in some ways, not in others. You just don't know which it is and what you're getting at the given moment. Thank you for your comments. Yeah.
Super. Thank you very much indeed. And now we're going to have one more respondent. The wonderful Kate Malloy from Atlantic Technological University. She is the president, she's an instructional designer. She is the president of the Computers in Education Society of Ireland, and she's starting a PhD here with myself and Dr. James Brunton in Dublin University. So I'd like to ask Kate to come up here and give a response, please.
Thanks a million, Eamon, and thanks a million, Punya, for your talk. In the interest of time, I do want to respond, but I also want to allow the large amount of participants we have here today to come in. I suppose similarly to Rob, I come at this in my day job from a third space role, and I love what you said, Rob, about that supportive and empathetic take that we have when we're working with staff, because we're working with people from variety of different abilities and different interests, but I also wear my SESI hat and thinking about what teachers are going through. And again, the variety of teachers of different skill sets, of different interests, and just different amounts of time to put into their exploration and experimentation with AI. So aside from everyone loving the drunk intern metaphor, which I do think all of us will be using going forward, Punya, you had just touched on there about bad actors and looking at that, avoiding the intense scrutiny that the inverse scrutiny that some of the educators are faced with in testing out these tools and researching these tools, and that governments and policymakers can kind of throw caution to the wind. But it got me thinking about some of the stuff that's happening in the teacher CPD space. And I'm wondering if we're starting to see perhaps some bad actors or evangelists or folks maybe seizing the opportunity like they have just in other situations like this. And personally, I'm coming from it right now with the Computers in Education Society. We're starting to ingest our archive of newsletters across 40 years or more, if we find older ones than that, with the Digital Repository of Ireland. And it's bringing up a lot of those memories around, oh, the internet's going to be in my classroom, it will replace me, and these kind of trends that we come to every so often and every few decades. And well, I wouldn't diminish the impact, which is evident, of the advancements in AI and in generative AI. But certainly it's a unique time in terms of opportunity. So what I really queried was, could I put it back to you, Punya, with your metaphors, that is there something we could use or leverage with teachers that are stuck for time and have a myriad of other concerns to embed criticality and to get them thinking about how they're investing their money, that what bandwagons are jumping on, and who to trust in terms of the research and in terms of the advice. And maybe that's a question for the wider group as well. But it's really got me thinking about those two sides of it, because in one sense, I'm in a very public facing role. And in the other sense, as Rob has noted, the kind of work we do with academic staff is kind of private and confidential to some extent, that we have those honest conversations. So just in the wider context, are there metaphors for bad actors that would be helpful for those of us that need to sort out the noble from the evangelist or the opportunist?
Yeah, that's a tough call. Now any product that's in the market just slaps the label AI on it, and you have no idea what form that AI is taking. Is it like a little model that's sitting on their server at home, or are they tapping into some of the more prominent, more powerful models? You just don't know. So that's happening for sure. Um, I sort of take a dual lens sort of approach to this. One is sort of, yes, there is the short term. I think that's the kind of thing like Rob talked about, or you're talking about, like, what do you do here now? And I think taking the sort of critical stance, not saying that this technology is not powerful, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a crazy, insane what it can do, and what sort of allows you, if you have some sufficient expertise in a domain, it really can amp up the work that you do. But I also take the long-term perspective on it. If I look back, I'm old enough to have been there at the birth of the World Wide Web. I was actually a grad student at Urbana-Champaign when like Mosaic, the first browser, came out. And then to see, knowing that there is this idea of the democratization of knowledge and information, the second Gutenberg revolution, but also seeing how social media, despite its incredible powers, pushes us into these algorithmic spaces where we are constrained in what we see and what we don't, that it allows for manipulation, it allows for bad actors, that we went with the advertising model for funding these things instead of, let's say, a micro subscription model, I think changes the fundamental economics of this thing. So I think about all of those, and the way I sort of try to think about it is, there are these quotations about like how film would change learning. And then people say, aha, see, it didn't. But you know what it did? It did in the sense it changed the world around us within which our classrooms exist. There's a reason why we have the rise of anti-colonial movements happening at a time, when radio and television, and film come about. It's also the time that we see the rise of fascism, right? Because these lead to ideas being able to be spread faster and wider. And yes, does it change the context within our classrooms? Exist for sure. Irrespective of whether you are a teacher who uses social media, your world is different because of social media. And so there's a long view that I try to sort of talk about as well, which is what is that world shaping up to be? And that's where I think the fact that these are anthropomorphic and that we anthropomorphize, sorry, and that they can be used to persuade, to manipulate, to form relationships in ways that we don't know how that will play out in a world where the economic system is focused on how much time you spend with this in order to, engagement is key, not purpose for you. Though if we had to pay for like social media, like Twitter or Facebook, they would care about our needs. The fact that we are getting it free, they care about the advertisers' needs. And I think that's going to be the model going forward as well, because people don't want to pay. So one of the things I think a lot about is like, what are the consequences of that playing out in the long run? And how can we think about it smarter? So I don't know if this is a direct answer to your question, but I think it's this double lens that we need to keep, which is always, yes, there are fires to be put out now. There are things we need to do now. This technology can help us do. I'm teaching a class right now on human creativity and AI, and it's a blast because I think this technology is great for creativity because it doesn't care about truth. So which means you can mix and match and do all kinds of fun things and use your filter to make something interesting. And one of the experiments I've been doing, I do these typographical designs. And you can go to my website and see those. And then I give this design to Claude and I say, Claude, I want you to write a short, pithy poem about what this, and then we go back and forth about that poem. So we co-write a poem. And it's a wonderful creative exercise. I have a lot of fun doing it, personally speaking. But at the same time, I cannot hide also from sort of the longer term consequences. And I think it's a responsibility as an academic, as somebody who's been in the field a long time, to keep pointing that out as well. Because there are enough people who are hyping it up, And so I hope that sort of addresses the sort of themes that you brought up.
Thank you, Punya. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. And that is all our panel here. We were going to have like 3 rounds of questions and stuff. So it just shows you how ludicrous what you think, how you think time is going to be filled and what it really does. So I'm just getting this agenda and just throwing in the bin now. And I think it's a sign of an amazing conversation and a really good time. And I'm conscious we're using the fishbowl model of where we're trying to represent lots of different voices because we've so many people on the call. And we've had so many good conversations in our things, and I see there's been brilliant things going on in the chat. And we're coming up to the hour now, and we maybe have time for one question if there's someone itching to ask us a question. Who hasn't had a chance to have a question or talk yet. If they'd like to put on your mic there for one question, we could take one. If anyone would like to respond to our wonderful presentations. James, go.
Yeah, I want to be provocative because like everything's been great, but I mean, if you follow the chat there, I feel so anxious about how little I know compared to some of the people in the chat and the stuff they're talking about and the level of depth that they're speaking at, and conversations I was having in the room where Eamon is right now earlier today was, there are lots of people out there who very much minimize the amount of time and effort they have to put into teaching and learning at all. You're talking about your academic teaching, learning, research, and service, okay, in the university, that kind of university context. Like, there's a difference between the people for whom this kind of stuff is deeply important, like, or the computer scientists who are already doing all this stuff every day, the critical researchers in pedagogy and critical digital scholars who, like, this is their bread and butter. This is the stuff that we reflect on. This is the stuff that we worry about. This is the stuff we come up with metaphors for. if you're talking about the business of the university and where we're all going and how we're going to, how these things are going to be included in the university or not, we have to think of those people who wouldn't in a million years come to this event at the same time. The university has to do things across the board, like how do we how do we go forward in a constructive way in an institution where we go from the people who are here today with the amount of knowledge that they have and the amount of reflecting they're doing down to other colleagues in the university for whom, and and associated with that, like the amount of training they have, the amount of capacity they have, where to from here in a university that has to operate that way or does operate that way.
But equally, we haven't mentioned the students here. What about the students? They are driving the need for us to be here at all. What do they need? How can we help them and support them in this journey? That's the key for me. We're not at a remove. University is based on students, student numbers, all of that. It's keeping us employed. So we need to help those students too.
I think that's an absolutely wonderful note, Alison. I'm gonna pause us there and just I'm conscious we're coming up to the hour, so we've got, we're doing a 55-minute hour, which is the best one you can have. And we're going to thank Professor Punya Mishra. Yeah, please.
Can I just add one thing? There was a comment from Jonathan about which I really, first of all, thank you for that comment, because I sort of indiscriminately generalize and I should be more careful about that. But the point is that it's not true that almost everybody anthropomorphizes. There is, as in every human capability that we have, they exist on a continuum. And in fact, in the Hyder and Simmel original study, I think they had whatever number of participants, there were one or two that they talk about who just wouldn't anthropomorphize, who wouldn't talk about in intentional terms. So as in everything, this exists in a continuum. So to recognize that fact, I think that's important. So different people will have different responses to these triggers. And I think that's important to know. I know we are tight on time. Eamon, last word to you. And
well, I'd just like to say we would love to have you here as well, right? So we're going to do this again and get you over here. We're going to go back and ask the people that have the money to give us more money the next time, so we can get you maybe 2/3, maybe 3/3 of the way across, right?
Well, I'm going to be in Dublin in May, so let's plan something for that. Yeah,
we'll link in then. And I think one of the things about whoever, I'm always conscious that people didn't always get a chance to talk or etc. and so on. And maybe people are coming here tomorrow. It'd be wonderful. We'll see you in person tomorrow for the people that could be on campus. And if you can't be here and you're angry and you're annoyed, that's good. We want you to be upset. We want you to be angry. Those are your friends. Those are your feelings. And that's how you know that you're not ChatGPT, right? This has none of those things. And I think those are all the things we need to help keep us human. And we've had an amazing talk about what it means to be human. And our heads are floating with great new ideas from all of this thing. And just like to thank you again, Punya, and everybody for your wonderful contributions, and wishing you wonderful in your day wherever you are. Thanks so much, everyone.